what is the task of these spells? What is Imperious?
It's about torture. It's like torturing people.
Imperious is Cruciatus.
Okay.
Cruciatus is the torture. The Avada Kedavra. What is Avada Kedavra?
So Avada Kedavra is killing people.
Yeah, it's lethal spell. Okay, and the third one is Imperious. What is Imperious?
When you can make people do what you want.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just take a look on these three spells. So, and how you could connect these three spells with the human rights. What do you think? How they could be connected with human rights? No guesses?
Okay. They maybe seem like when you don't give a right for people for their basic needs like life, free will, and like
free from torture, freedom from torture, correct.
Yeah.
So when it comes to human rights, we are always discussing human rights as a system of protection of our so-called three spheres of integrity. Our physical integrity, our psychological, or if you want, mental integrity, and social integrity. So when it comes to these three unforgivable spells, this is exactly the spells which are severely violated all three sphere for the human rights protection. People's life, people's mental ability to do something against your will. This is the violation of your personal choice. So this is against your freedom, against your personal, your right to choose wisely. And finally, this is the freedom from physical integrity when it comes to when we are discussing the cruciatus. So this is the torture, which is strictly forbidden by the international law of human rights. Okay, so this is how is it not coincident? Do you know what was the Rowling, one of her previous affiliation before she started to be the famous writer? Do you know what is her work had been previously before she started to write and convert herself into the famous writer? What kind of work she had in the past, which was strictly related with the human rights?
Maybe she was something about a lawyer. I remember she was a clerk and she was going to her work every day and inspiring people with London.
Yeah, she lived in London. She worked as a clerk, but she was affiliated with one of the famous human rights organizations. It's called Amnesty International. In Amnesty International, and she was responsible for reading and working with the letters from Africa. And then she lately confessed when the substantial amount of the different scenes and storyline she has got from these letters, because that was the most awful and notorious reading she ever had, follow her own confession. Okay, so that's her commitment to the human rights is not coincident. This is the part of her life. And that is why she is discussing, and she has created the magic world, which was fulfilled, which is fulfilled by the different controversies and direct human rights violation. What kind of human rights violation you might find in the Harry Potter? A part of the spell. We already discussed them. What is the constitution of this magical world? What kind of injustice you could find in the system of this magical world, or in the relationship between the different wizards within this magical world?
Maybe like the issue with mudbloods and some guys who are not whose parents are not magicians.
They
have a conflict between.
Do you remember that? Yeah. Do you remember that's how the Malfoy offended Hermione? How exactly he called her?
He said mudblood.
Correct, mud-blooded. So mud-blooded. So that is what kind of the real social issue it's strictly remind you?
Racism.
Yeah, and Holocaust maybe.
Holocaust. Yeah, when it comes to the extermination of the half-blooded wizard, yes, it's very much. We didn't witness the extermination, but we precisely witnessed what we might call ethnic cleansing, because it's in the latest books when they started the searching of the half-blood within the Ministry of Magic, and they interrogated them. That was precisely the very much remind us the searching of the non pure blood German, and separation of those who might have the non, for example, Jewish ancestries, and so forth. Okay, and when it comes to about two main characters in the book, I mean the Harry Potter himself and Hermione Granger, how they, from your perspective, are involved in the human rights battles. Let's start with the Harry Potter. What do you think about Harry Potter? Is it possible to compare him with the different human rights activists, maybe?
I don't know the real reference for him, but as for his like portrait, he always was friends with some weird maybe people like Palumina Lovegood, or with some creatures who weren't considered equal, like Dobby. And it was in his mind that there is no much difference between people, and even in the bad ones or weird ones, you can see something good and something valuable.
I'm agree. So that's remember what Hoblins said. So you're a very unusual wizard, Mr. Potter, right? So because that's is interesting. This is the very clear message for us to consider this wizard world is not a world of the justice or equality. So we have a number of injustice and equality within this ideal originally world, right? And what is do you remember why the Harry Potter always afraid to find himself similar, something to find the similarities between his own behavior and feelings and the Voldemort? What exactly? Well, he had discussed it several times, and one of the most important for us quotation is in the book the Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Do you remember what exactly he has told to the Dumbledore when they are discussing the similarities between the Voldemort and Harry Potter? Do you remember what exactly was the citation of the Dumbledore about the similarities, about how they are similar?
I really remember this thing that Dumbledore said, that when Harry was struggling with the similarities of him and Voldemort, Dumbledore said to him that it's not about what you're similar, it's what about you're different with him. It's maybe not the answer to your question, but
yeah. But the next sentence will be about exactly what is the difference about.
It's like he said something like that you have people around you that support you or something like that, and that that you have a heart. Like,
the most important for us in this context to discuss, but what I'm trying to tell you, that is what the Dumbledore has told. Yes, you're very similar to the Voldemort in particular because of your neglectance of the general rules. Remember? So that is very important. So in fact, yes, the Harry Potter always trying to undermine or just challenge or directly violated or abuse their strict rules. Do you remember that in the first scene, when it just appeared in the Hogwarts, what kind of regulation he violated immediately? Just in the first book. His first day in the Hogwarts, the first lesson. Huh? Remember what Harry did, and most important, not what he did, but why. It was the lesson of the fly to the brush. Remember? And what the Harry did, it was strictly forbidden to fly without the tutor.
Yeah.
Because she was out. And what the Draco Malfoy did?
The same thing.
No, well, Draco violated is not for the same thing. He started to bullying the Neville, right? And what did Harry did? He immediately violated the rule to restore the justice. And that is the very interesting message, and there is the important feature of his portrait. Rowling is portraying him as a person who are regularly violating the rules. But as Dumbledore said, you're violating rules not for the sake of just violating of rules. No, you're violating of rules on purpose to protect your friends, to restore the justice. And that is the very interesting dilemma, which was always being beyond the human rights strategy in the different historical and political context. Because what we do know from the history of 20th century, we have at least two severely different and deeply different attitudes to human rights strategy. One is Martin Luther King Jr. Do you know who was the Martin Luther King Jr.? Who was the Martin Luther King? Who knows?
Human rights activist.
Correct. What day and what country and what he is famous about?
He's famous for his struggle for Black people rights in the United States.
He was struggled for the equality. And you remember, he was one of the leader of nonviolent resistance. He always claimed that our resistance, our need to restore the justice should be peaceful and nonviolent. And what is the most important, when he was arrested and he was detained in the United States for how we would define it, Russia unsanctioning demonstration or meeting, he was detained in in Birmingham. And he read the letter. So this very famous letter from the Birmingham jail, when he defined his attitudes to the law, to the rule of law. And that was very interesting formula. And he explained, violate the unjust law, this is the obligation of the human rights activist. To follow the real law, that is not to follow the unjust and unlawful regulations. You should violate unjust or unlawful regulations to represent your trust and your faith to the real law. And that is very interesting. So that's despite of the fact that Martin Luther King always claimed that, well, nonviolent resistance, this nonviolent resistance, they regularly violated their regulations. Do you know how they did it? So they peacefully violated for example, segregation rules. What they did, that was the number of United States, substantial amount of the states, they have the special place. This place only for white people, or this bench only for white people. This half of the bus or the tram is only for white people. What the black people did, so they peacefully occupied their part for the whites, and they had been detained, they had been beaten, they had been fined for that, but they repeatedly violated it. In the very end, it was, as you probably understand, it was the Superior Court finally declared the segregation is against the constitutional law and constitutional order of United States, and segregation was declared as unconstitutional. It was the beginning of the civil rights revolution in the United States and end of segregation policy against Black people. So that was the one approach to the human rights. It was another approach to human rights created in Soviet Union. And do you know who created the theory of human rights in Soviet Union? Have you ever heard this family, Alexander Volpin? No? If I pronounced you his patronic name and give you a hint, he is the son of the famous poet of Russia, one of the most famous. Could you guess who it was? He was Alexander Sergeyevich Volpin. Alexander Sergeyevich Volpin.
Maybe Yesenin's son.
Correct. His full surname was Alexander Sergeyevich Yesenin Volpin. He was a son of the Sergei Yesenin. And the Alexander Sergeyevich Yesenin Volpin, he was famous because he unexpectedly created or invented a Soviet Union concept of human rights for the Soviet Union descent. He extracted from the Soviet Constitution. It was absolutely different approach to human rights. The Alexander Sergeyevich Yesenin Volpin, in the context of totalitarian state, authoritarian state, let's put it this way, he proposed the idea that the best fight for human rights is to push the government, push the authority to follow its own regulations and its own constitution. The claim was the Soviet authority should trust and should follow its own constitution, because the rights for the freedom of speech, ironically, if you could see on the closely to the Constitution of 1936, it was Stalin's constitution. But nevertheless, in the Stalin constitution, it was the kind of range of the human rights, including freedom of speech even. Of course, nobody before the human rights activists in 50s, before the Yesenin Volpin, nobody considered this as a serious right. So nobody took it seriously. Nobody seriously read the constitution. What they did, they have created from the legal perspective, it might be defined as an ultra-positivist approach to the human rights. When the human rights is not something we having outside of law, like Martin Luther King Jr. claimed. No, the human rights from the Soviet distant context could be found in the Soviet Constitution, could be extracted and withdrawn from the regulations of the Soviet laws and Soviet Constitution in particular. And this is the interesting how the Harry Potter is absolutely opposite type. Harry Potter is violating the rules to restore the justice. In this perspective, Harry Potter could be compared directly with Martin Luther King Jr., but not with the Soviet legacy of the human rights. And the second person who are precisely working for the human rights in the book, that is Hermione Granger. What is her project on human rights?
Protection of the house elves. Correct.
And what is when we are observing the story and the result of the Harry Potter struggle, it was successful. So that's in the very end, he overcame, and the Voldemort fell down, and the justice more or less restored. Right? How about house elves?
So they were basically slaves for elves were basically slaves for serving wizards and restoring all they need.
But is it successful attempt to liberate the house elves? Do you know how even the spelling of the Society of the Liberation of the House Elf was a spew. It was a kind of, you know, vomit. Why? What was the problem? It was the more or less the prominent and the very noble task to liberate house elves. But why? Why the Hermione was totally, well, it was total disaster, in fact. So what she did, she tried to liberate it. She tried to disseminate the handmade stuff around the different venues of the Hogwarts, just to give the house elves chance to be liberated. But they look like they're neglected. They openly refused to accept this proposal. Why? What do you think? Why? Let's us explore the characters of the house elves in the novel. How many house elves we do know in the book by name?
I guess 2, maybe. Dobby and the other one who works for Sirius Black.
Yeah, Dobby and Creature, but there was another 2 that was very important. Well, remember who it was? Well, the Creature, do you remember who was the Winky? Do you remember the story with the Barty Crouch Jr.? All this story around the Harry Potter and Goblet of Fire. Do you remember why Winky was fully involved? That's needs to be. You should know the details from the book because it was out of the movie precisely. Remember what is the? But briefly, this story was the follow, because the Barty Crouch himself, from the Ministry of Magic, he has found that his son as Death Eater escaped the Azkaban, and he took him under Imperio's spell at home. But then he has managed to escape, to defect the home, and the Bertie Crouch Jr. and Bertie Crouch accused Winky, and he will just liberate her without her will. And remember what had happened with her. Remember how?
I guess she was drinking, yeah.
Yeah.
When she gets her freedom, she was so depressed that she then had an alcoholism.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You see that only 2 free elves in the book, Dobby and Winky. Dobby is, well, relatively free, but he's alone, and it looks like he was, and nevertheless he couldn't find the normal job, and only Dumbledore provided for him and for the Winky the job in the Hogwarts. And how about Winky? Do you remember how she's described her fate and how she's her lamentation about her misery? Remember how she defined what had happened with her? She described it. Winky is ashamed. Winky is ashamed to be free house elf. So that's just very interesting. So you see, for the one side, the well, from the perspective of the Hermione, so this is the kind of important task and noble task to liberate the house elves. But the problem is that in the real stories and the real communications, that Hermione never ever asked the Dobby even what he would love to have. So that's very interesting. That is the story. This is the very serious crisis sometimes, and this is we are discussing it in the classes on the human rights or the minority issues. in my classes, because there is the number of the serious questions about this story. First of all, why the Hermione failed. First of all, she doesn't have any support from her mates. Even her mates always laughing when she tried to do something to liberate the house elves. And this is even the liberally thinking, I mean, not those who are for the Death Eaters, but liberally thinking in the Phoenix Order, they are absolutely, they didn't support her attempt to liberate the house elves, even her friends. And by the way, if you could take a look closely, we didn't see any serious support from the Harry Potter even. Although Harry Potter himself did that's the very important a very important move, because when he behaved differently to the house elves, and that was the reason why the creature. Do you know what is exactly creature affiliation was? I mean, the political affiliation was in the time of the battle between the Voldemort forces and the defenders of the Hogwarts. Where was the creature in this particular moment?
He supported bad guys, Death Eaters.
Yeah, no, that's not true. Creature was the head of the house elf who protected the public. Yes, creature, and the reason of that was very, very simple. That Harry addressed to him an absolutely different manner, like a Sirius Black. Sirius treated him, not very politely, at least. And Harry Potter just changing his attitudes to the creature, and creature changed his attitudes to the wizards. Although, as you remember, their first meeting wasn't very friendly, at least, right? And the general issue is the reason why the Hermione could be discussed as a kind of author of the failed human rights project. And the possible explanation would be followed. That is the situation when the human rights activists try to do something for their particular community without asking questions, without to recognize the real needs and claims. And this is the problem, because even the creature. Do you remember what was with the fate of creature after in the very end of the book? Creature is house elf of the Harry Potter. He's making sandwiches for him. So that is irony is despite of the fact that Harry Potter is the kind of the classical ideal hero of this book, he has nothing. He has no moral restrictions or certain considerations to use the house elf. In reality, it's slaves. And when it comes to the comparative perspective, what would be your historical references? Who could be named as a kind of predecessors of this character? I mean, house elves.
Maybe slaves. In the United
Slaves, but where slaves? I would agree, but where exactly?
Maybe I'm sorry. Maybe we can say that it's something like крепостные in Russia, when they had like a nominal freedom, but they were still working to the people they've worked for years, because it was like their own. They didn't know how to act differently, and they just stick to the point they knew how to react, and it wasn't their will to be free, like in some way. It's the way you say that Hermione wanted them to be free, but they kind of didn't. It's like someone out of the group wanted best for another group, but they don't really know what they need, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I would agree. But when it comes to the characters, it may be closer to the home slaves in the South states of United States before the Civil War. The reason why I'm thinking this way is that the problem is when you probably know the Civil War in the United States, are you? And do you know one of the not the main reason, but one of the reason of the struggle is the fact that the South states, they prefer to keep the slavery, while the northern states, they were for the abolishing the slavery. And their story is unexpectedly, sometimes the slaves, they voluntarily agreed to fight for the slavery together with their masters in this war. And this was interesting. So the pessimism of the Rowling in this particular case is the simple fact that the freedom itself not is something we could enjoy, by default. So that sometimes the slavery could be inherited, could be, that's transmitted through as a social institute, and even had been converted into the kind of proudness and nobility. Do you know what? Do you remember what was the main dream of Creature? How he should be ended in the House of Blacks? Her mother was so old to bring the tea for the masters, for the blacks, and she was beheaded. In her head was, the decorated the entrance to the house of the Sirius Black when the Harry and Hermione entered this place for the first time. And Creature was dreamed. That was his destiny. Just imagine that. So he is voluntarily dreamed to have his head nearby her head of her mother. So this is, and the main criticism here, maybe pessimism of the Rowling, is the simple fact sometimes, and this is the real story, sometimes the complexity of the claims and needs of the particular community, they might be ignored by the human rights activist, because and this is about even the ongoing discussion about the universalism or versus particularism of human rights, because the Hermione is here as the barrier of this idea. Human rights are universal, therefore all households should feel themselves ashamed and should be liberated. But the story is, in reality, what we see that none of them are interested to be free, to be liberated. So just the one, Dobby, and Vinky will be liberated. Well, she was rather at the deepest misery. Describe her liberation as a kind of humiliation, rather. And this is the maybe second point. And this is the long conversation till now, how the human rights activists, how human rights organizations could discuss and could be keeping in mind the variation of the minority rights and even the contradiction between the general statements of human rights and the particular interest of the particular group, if any. Okay, so, and maybe the third point, we'll still have the little bit time to name what kind of other magical creatures we have in the novel, which are also do not treat it equally to the wizards. A part of the half-blooded, a part of the house elves.
Werewolves, maybe.
Werewolves, they're potentially dangerous, rather. But how about the different magic creatures that they play the important role in the script, in the scenario, in the story? Remember that the kind of native population of the wild nearby the Hogwarts, the people with the very special centaur. Yeah, Anastasia, I agree. In Centaurus, correct. And do you remember how they are described by Rowling, by the author? Well, what is the difference between the wizard and centaurus in the perspective of their, you know, special ability, or the special, maybe special ability to do something in the magic? Remember? Okay, so let me ask you a very simple question. Just take a look. So this is the small community of the very particular creatures who living in the wild, in the very special reservation. And it looks like they have been there for a very long time, and even before the wizard. What kind of community, what kind of situation it could remind you?
Maybe Native Americans.
Correct. So this is the Native Americans, or we could call it more politely now, the First Nation. The First Nation, it could be described, and they're also described as a people with a special affiliation with the nature, with the special ability, well, not without Orientalism, I would say here, but still the special ability to do their very special magic in comparing with. But do you remember what was the attitudes of the majority of this community when the one centaurus decided to teach in the Hogwarts? Remember? Because the Dumbledore invited one of the centaurs to teach. Remember what was the fate of him in the very end? No? He was rejected by the community because his agreement to collaborate with the wizards. And this is well, and another community would be mentioned also, will be recalled here, is the Hoblin. How about Hoblins? How they are treated? That's interesting. One of the I'm not sharing this statement, but one the professor of Bar Ilan University from Israel, she even described the Hoblins as a kind of humiliating picture of the Jewish people somehow in the picture portrayed in the Rowling. So I don't think it's the Rowling as anti-Semite. I don't think so. But the interesting how the Hoblins are describing in the novel. What is the story? Why then the Hoblins are, you know, served in the very particular places? And what is the relationship between Wizard World and the Hoblins? Remember, what was the history of their relationship? No? It was the war. It was the war. The Hoblins were military defeated. And even the sword of the Gryffindor. Remember what was the origin of this sword? The sword was directly took from the Hoblins. It was Hoblins made. And Gryffindor took it as the main, you know, main item, as a kind of very, very special magic ability. So that is complexity of the war, of this war. Well, I'm not recalling giants, for example. Giant is also a very particular story in the book. It looks like it's also very not very well treated minority. So that is the we can see the world which is the culturally diverse, and this diversity had been organized in a not very equal way. So that's this is the precisely cultural diversity world, but this diversity treated not very equal basis. We have the Hoblins who are fully oppressed, and they could be defined as a kind of trade minority, the minority who are fully concentrated in a certain area of the economy, mostly on the finance. We have the centaurs who are closer to or could remind us the Native Americans. We could have the house elf who might be, well, I even would compare the house elf with women, because when it comes to women's rights, that's house elves could be closer to the patriarchal world when it comes to the discussion of the real discrimination against women. So they remember what their house elves do. They cleaning, cooking, preparing food, well, the washing, and they're absolutely invisible at the same time. So that is their kind of, you know, ideal women for this, you know, oppressed situation in the 19th century. For example, it's famous formula in German, Kinderküche und Kirche, right? So the kitchen, church, and children. So that is the variation. Why it is so important to discuss? Because this is not only a fiction. That is the very important and very provocative stories, which could tell us a lot about the current controversies in the human rights. And there is no proper way here. Well, the Rowling gave us the world full of the controversies, questions, unresolved issues, and unended story. And this is why I fully enjoyed her the Potteriana world, when she is trying to extend the world and or sometimes explain the different unresolved questions from the book, or sometimes will provide some kind of historical roots of the different situations or the different groups and minorities. And I would love if after my lecture you will take a look into the book and read it again. And I especially would be successful if you will read it in English, because despite of the very successful translation, the English reading is much more enjoyable, believe me. Okay, thank you. Sanjay, I believe floor is yours.
Thank you a lot. Professor, we can't hear you well. Could you please try to enter the session again? Because now we can't hear you, unfortunately. Well, while we are waiting for Professor Sanjay to join, I can see that Professor Dubrovski is still here, so probably you have some questions that he can answer.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you well.
All right. My only request
Oh no, you're losing your connection again. Hello?
Am I audible? Hello?
Now
Am I
we
audible?
hear you. Yes.
All right, all right. Give me a minute. I guess I'll go to a place where I can be heard a bit more clearly. Allow me a minute.
Okay.
Sure. Am I much better here with the voice?
Yes.
All right.
It's much better now.
All right. This is an internet connectivity which is rather erratic here. So I have to request you to excuse me for the video pad. The primary reason is that I would love to have an interaction at the very fag end of my, I would say, lecture, but I don't want to take the risk of putting myself away from internet, right? So as you might know that I'm still not in Russia, stranded abroad primarily because of the flight restrictions. So that is one part of the thing. So should we start the class today now?
Yes, we can.
Or sure, would you like to speak a few words, Elena?
No, not really. So if you have slides to show, then you can.
No, not really. I don't have the slides because there is not much of a need for that.
Okay.
I really want to make it a very interactive discussion with the students who are around here in the class. Can some of you raise a bit of your basic concern, which is about the pandemic and human rights query? Can some of you have the very basic, concerns or questions that are connected with that? Because this is one issue that is quite pertinent in our 2020 world that has just passed by us. bruising, tormenting practically everybody on this planet, certainly not for better. And as I can see, there's a huge number of students who are here on the platform. I'll just try to start my today's discussion with two questions. Whether the world was ready when the pandemic had hit upon us. And the answer is none. The most advanced countries, OECD countries, G7 countries, they were also at the receiving end, and they suffer the worst cases. If you see the number of people who have met with untimely death in the largest economy of the planet, then the G7 countries, it's rather disappointing era. And besides that, what has happened that humanity per se, both in the established liberal democracy as well as in third world countries, I mean, across the world has witnessed a very strange situation where the restrictions that they were imposed upon both the mighty as well as the the proletariats, so to say, it was unprecedented after, so to say, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. The way the people were herded inside the house, the restriction was that you can't walk more than 200 meters or so. So it was a restriction. So this was, one, and as my discussion today is titled on the subject of surfing on the waves of, between the pandemic and the restriction that most of us, I mean, all of us have been subjected to. My initial, I guess, the point of discussion would be that how we would take some of those, I would say, take notes of the situation, because it's almost 11 months when the pandemic has really hit upon, I would say, the world. And in the part of the world where you guys are, in Russia, the tragedy started to unfold, say, end of March, mid-March onwards, and second part of the March to be more correct. And it has a still, has to recover its self-confidence. So besides, one of the other major factor is the way the state has become, like the what you call the when the king is called naked. That means the state's capacity to deliver, the state's capacity to engage with the situation. They looked highly unprepared. Now, it is on that background I would like to engage the subject of human rights, the state's capacity, the citizens' position, the citizens' engagement in order to have their faith about the state further strengthened. The answer is no. The citizens felt that the states really let them down in many of the cases. And the policies were, taken on the subjects of health, I would say, they were very haphazard ones. Many were, improvisation upon improvisation. And many such states which had really boasted that their citizens have higher immunity, their state's health apparatus are, world-class and second to none. Even they were subjected to massive exposure, so to say. They were seeing that they are lacking the basic infrastructure. Now, it is against this backdrop we need to identify what kind of human rights were being violated or being seen to be lacking for the people at large. One of the key questions is that we, as our master's program of public policy, which has both the policy supply side, which is policymakers, epistemic community, policy advisors, politicians, bureaucrats, etc., etc. So that part I'm sure that has been covered both by Professor Biliaeva, Professor Victor Albert, Professor Schlaffer, and others. And now we along with Dimitri and I, we are trying to speak on the on the demand side of the policy, the people who are the recipient of the different policies that is being made by the state or the policymakers. And that is where the human rights as an idea, as a concept comes into play. Why so? Because it is for the people, it is for the common human beings in a certain state for whom their policies are made. And at the end of the day, most of these policies are in particular in the area of education, health, etc., are emancipatory in nature because they are supposed to be made, they are ought to be made, keeping in mind that they should be serving the interest of the most vulnerable section of the society too, not only for the few. And it is in that context we have to see that whether the rights of citizens in different states, both in the developed society as well as in developing society, were being met. What would be really interesting is to note is when the pandemic started to unfold. So if you see the last year, January, the time, practically almost this period of time in Jan 2020, the world was looking quite okay, quite in rhythm, and the issue that was really troubling the larger group of community where the international political standoff between Iran and United States, etc., etc. Nobody had thought about pandemic. Of course, it was really brewing up somewhere in China and Wuhan, but mid-February onwards, Italy became a hotspot, and then the diseases started to really spread out, like opening of the wings of the and this was like an inferno. It spread out so fast and raised across the Atlantic. In no time, you had flight restrictions, and all of a sudden, the world's movement came to a screeching halt. March 2020. And from that time onwards, what we are living is, in the period is now you can call, few years from now, you will say post-COVID world. It has an epoch-making impact on human society. And I would say that in the global economic pattern, that what we witness today, the way the international, financial reforms have been, going on uninterrupted for past 30, 35 years. And the way most of the countries of the world have been harmonized economically, fiscally, financially, their labor laws, their standardization and harmonization has taken place. All of a sudden, most of the states were found that they are lacking the very basic infrastructure there because they neglected in a big way the health sector, the primary health sector. Now, the question can be that what about the investment of the developing countries on the health sector? So there are certain data and graphs which can be further culled out and can be rather unpacked to identify and understand that 20 years down the line, say from late mid-1990s to 2008 financial crisis, the major investment of the state has been on the I would say on the primary and secondary market, but not on the infrastructure, on the state's vital organs. And what you would further see is that the state's economic capacity might have increased manyfold in the gross terms. And what I say by gross terms is the GDP, gross domestic product, of each one of the countries in developing society, developing countries, has increased manyfold. There are countries which are called emerging economies, Asian tigers, you name them. But what you witness 2020, that, oh, the states have failed miserably to take care of the basic logistics for the citizens' health. Now, the way the hospitals were found lacking the very basic, facilities, the beds were missing. Forget about, oxygen cylinders. Forget about PPE. Forget about, those, ultra modern, ventilators. The beds were missing in the hospital. The nurses were missing in the hospital. The doctors were not there. And that's not the story of the, I would say the remote regions of Russia, but it is a story that has happened across the world in the transition economies. And that really makes us take a pause and think aloud that whether the policymakers were really judicious and having the foresight to take a decision which really empowers and consolidates the overall capacity of the citizens. Now, when we talk in the language or the definition of rights, rights is not only about how you express your political ideas, but whether your socio-economic conditionalities are being consolidated by the fair play of the state. Whether the state was redistributive, egalitarian by increasing the capacity of the citizens, possibility to live with dignity. And if that has not happened, that way you would say that one kind of human rights violation has occurred silently over the years in many, many decades in the past. Now, that is a long-term tragedy. What we have witnessed at the same time that many states have taken this pandemic as a golden opportunity to create a gagging mechanism over the citizens' political, movement, their political aspiration, their desire to express their thoughts, and in the name of social distance, in the name of isolation, in the name of creating a much better, health, or I would say health and safety environment. Now, these are the two factors on which we say the human rights restrictions. Why I would say the first part is rather important, because as COVID is a transitory phase in our life, it might take a few more months, in order to wind down its menace on Earth. But the impact that has created a massive suffering to a huge number of people has happened before COVID. COVID has just unpacked, COVID has just exposed this unpreparedness of the state, the miserable health policies of many states of the world who were claiming themselves to be doing great on macroeconomic indicators. And that human rights violation has been a long-lasting one. Because what has happened by certain authoritarian and dictatorial regimes in different parts of the world has been just, I would say, further screwing up of the citizens, I would say, political oxygen cylinder. So they were gagged. But what has happened on a long-term basis is that the citizens have been deprived in an incremental way. And that deprivation, that exploitation is a long-term human rights violation. What pandemic has exposed before us, that pandemic is also, this COVID-19 is a great equalizer. It has touched both Boris Johnson as well as a common sweeper on the street alike. So you cannot purchase the health safety just by being, being rich and powerful. But on a larger note, what we see is that it has really brought at the forefront the unpreparedness of the different states on their health sector. That is one area that does demand an overhauling of the policy space, that how the states would recalibrate and reevaluate their prioritization on the subject of how would they invest, how would they reestablish their health sector all over again, how much of the state's intervention is vital and critical. Because what is another factor that we witnessed when the New York Stock Exchange was tanking, and many companies which are part of the Fortune 500, they were subject to hostile takeovers by the different hedge funds and sovereign wealth fund, including by the Chinese companies. Sometime I got to listen, and I'm sure that some of you might have heard the same joke, that China won the Third World War without firing a single bullet. But it's of course an exaggeration. But on a general note, what we can witness that at that critical moment, the invisible hand of the market, what Hayek, the Nobel Prize winner on economics, had spoken, the neoclassical school, Chicago school as we call them. None of the market players came at the forefront to take the burden or take the initiative, barring Bill Gates Foundation, etc., for how to combat the COVID crisis. Now, if you can see the way the leading international institution in the European Union, the Stabilization Fund mechanism came with $1 trillion plus, rescue plan, organized by Christian Lagarde, who is the, in charge of the European Central Bank, and a similar mechanism were, brought by the former president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, who spoke about, the stimulus package, which was again totaling over $1 trillion in 2 different tranches. So it is more than $2 trillion plus. So if you talk about that kind of investment that has been made in order to make different small-term workers, entrepreneurs, the people who were working on daily wages basis, and all of them became unemployed overnight. Now, how did they manage to survive? Whether their right to leave was brought into question. So the certain states which had a stronger currency, larger or largest economies, or they are part of the global north economic space, they could manage to recalibrate their economic viability and stability plan. And that made the economic rights of the poorest of the poor people in their countries, in their respective countries, a rather, I would say, a viable, story, a viable transition period. But what about many such countries where the people were already living on less than $2 a day? And the answer is that in those countries, the political rights of the citizens were the most affected areas. They were not affected much on economic fronts because they were not doing very good even before the pandemic happened. So that is part of the economic rights, okay? So when we talk about this whole bouquet of human rights, so you talk about the socio-economic rights at the forefront because they are the ones which allows you to have the aspiration for political and cultural rights. Political and cultural rights are the next stage of human rights, as you call them. At the very primary level, you have the socio-economic rights. And at the socio-economic rights, you can see that including the OECD countries and those countries which are considered more, emerging economy, the human rights on the question of livelihood, on the question of survival, on the question of the way they have to live and to pay their monthly wage bills, the state came forward. Where was the invisible hand of the market? The answer is the market remained silent. The market remained absent. The market took its cap in the hand and begged for the bailout, both in the Capitol Hill in the United States, in the Brussels, in Moscow, in Berlin, you name the country and the capital, the market took out its cap in the hand and asked for the bailout. And that practically also explains that as far as the socioeconomic rights of the citizens are concerned, the state has a certain role to play, which you cannot wish-wash. That is one part of the story. The negative part of the story is that the state looked utterly miserable, utterly unprofessional, and utterly unprepared when this pandemic broke out like an inferno across the Atlantic, both sides, as well as in the Southern Hemisphere. The citizens were, looking for solutions which were at least for a coherent path, direction, a roadmap, and practically most of the states were looking upon this issue as an act of improvisation. That is one part. And that really brought not certain, I would say substantial credibility crisis for many of states. That is the flip side of the coin. On the positive note, you can see that the states intervened. The states tried to uphold and at least sustain partially to substantially case-to-case wise the socioeconomic rights of the citizens. But at the same time, the state looked highly unprepared for that. It further exposed the way the health sector has been neglected for decades. in most of the transition economies, in former Soviet Union countries, in East European countries, even in the most developed and advanced, neoliberal economies of the world. And I would say, if some of you who might have followed the story of the Brexit and before Boris Johnson became the prime minister, and his idea or a strong, I would say, public murmur about the sell-off of NHS, National Health Services. And I'm sure that all of you might have followed the news when Boris Johnson was practically on the verge of, kicking the bucket. It was the National Health Service doctors that saved his life. That is one part of the story. National Health Service, a private public sector health organization, those one of those bodies whose mandate is to protect the rights of the citizens on the health sphere. Now, what does it really? I would say, what kind of a deduction we can make out of this? I would say deliberation that I'm trying to relay in my engagement with you today. That there are no silver bullets in the policy planning while you're handling a black swan moment. So this was a black swan moment that happened in 2020 that practically brought most of the states on its knees. It exposed the vulnerabilities, the weakness, the unpreparedness of the states, gross negligence on the health sector. Not because of pandemic, because COVID is a very new phenomenon, but it also opened to the media, the press, the way the ramshackle conditions that the hospital has. The way the hospital has been, subject to massive negligence, endemic, I would say, systemic corruption and underfunding for years and years together. Now, on the last point, I would say that the set of instruments and institutions that has come up in 9 months' time because of COVID, I would say many states, and I would say the agencies of the state, I would say the security officials and intelligence organizations of each one of those, I would say, major countries would try to consolidate on the gains of COVID crisis. In the name of social distancing, in the name of isolation, in the name of security of the health of masses, they would try to deter common people to come together, to assemble together, to express together, to protest together, because they would say it is a health hazard. Now, what we can really, I would say, identify further on the line is that where is the midway? Now, as at this moment, we are sitting in different parts of the world here and trying to connect over the winter school on the public policy, class today, and we are trying to understand, the issue at hand, which is about the COVID and human rights. Technology has been a unifier, and we believe that in a world of this virtual engagement, in a world of virtual connectivity, we would find a midway through. There is a possibility that there is an opportunity that the protest would also become digitalized, the assemblage would become digitalized, as it has been so, including in Arab Spring, where the social media was the catalyst, was the catalyzer, the critical difference in order to make a protest movement successful. But that is the political and political rights in particular. But on the larger human rights bouquet, the big I would say set of rights, you would also see the way this COVID has also unmasked the limitations of global governance. Unfortunately, you would remember one of the stories that when the French government had ordered for a certain quantity of masks to be purchased from China, the United States played heavy-handedness, and from the airport stole all the orders that were made by the French government and said, okay, we pay more, and we take it all the way from the airport tarmac. That that looked like the age of Grotius, the 16th and 17th century international law, the father of the public international, who spoke about, okay, so the right of the might that was practically, sold, and the nation state's assertion really came into play. Well, World Health Organization took a lot of bricks on and a lot of eggs on its face, primarily because of the discrediting, tweets that were being barraged over World Health Organization head. That is another part. Why it is important? Because if you would say the way the world is in 2020, 2021 today, we are living in a very interconnected world. And we have certain institutions for which we have, I would say, global credibility. And these institutions have come up not overnight. World Health Organization is one of that. And that institution is taking care of the health of the human beings across the world, and including, and their mandate is to take care of poorest of the poor nations more. And the way WHO was being abused, the way it was being targeted continuously, it also affected lots and lots of people who were from the Southern Hemisphere, those people who really needed policy directions from the experts. And there was a massive confusion at the time. So what you can witness is that besides the restriction of citizens' physical movement, restrictions on citizens' assemblage somewhere, restrictions on their political, expression platforms, you also witness that there was a sheer confusion that was littered across for a big period of time by a massive, I would say, a barrage of attack that was unleashed on World Health Organization, or I would say other international organizations. Now we are talking today, 27th of January, a week after Trump era is over. So we can witness whether the multilateral organizations can come up again in order to underpad, strengthen, and consolidate the rights of the citizens across the world. It's too early to say that, because the effect and impact of the last year, 2020, and the way the major players of the world have acted or not acted, on this COVID crisis, is going to have, I would say, at least a midterm impact, if not the long-term impact. Citizens' rights, of course, the face recognition technology has become mainstreamed, and the social distancing would be utilized many a times as a pretext to deter the citizens, massive, or I would say mass gathering. And that is the fear that many political scholars and thinkers and writers and intellectuals are really voicing out. They're thinking aloud on that. But I'm rather optimistic on that front. And what I've witnessed is that the world is regaining its confidence because of the successful vaccines that has come up by many companies, and vaccination has been on. So I would say the civil society will try to reassert itself, to reclaim its platform, reclaim its territory. And one thing that has really been a letdown is the way the market has behaved or not behaved during the massive crisis. The way the layoff happened, the way the people were kicked out of the job, the way their economic rights were being abused, the way the economic hardships were being brought at a cascading level, that practically is a shocking thing, that whether our economic policies that many countries have been following blindly because of the recommendation by the smart economics scholars, professors, thinkers, and they are following it on dot-to-dot basis, whether it is a panacea for a future where certain black swan moments can occur again, and the society can really feel themselves highly unprepared once more. So that is one fear. whether the society is prepared enough for a black swan moment, whether the state's capacity is the only buffer between the tragedy and the people. So if the state is the buffer, whether the state has to act in a more judicious, in a more redistributive economic agenda, through a more judicious redistributive economic agenda, or it has to really leave what you call the invisible hand of the market to rule over all of us. And that is where the critical point of human rights is concerned matters. So if at all the market is allowed to decide and dictate the terms, markets should also have a corresponding obligation that where the stocks are low, not of their companies, but of the people's morale and confidence, the market should underpad, consolidate, and support the humanity at large. And that is where we feel that the market has failed us terribly across the globe. A state had to intervene, a state had to improvise, a state had to act in a miserable way, but it was again the state that really did that. But the flip side of the coin is that the state should not encroach upon the space of the civil society, which is the third segment between the state and the market. The market can be corrected and amended, but the civil society's turf, its platform, should not be encroached upon by the state. And I am rather optimistic, cautiously though, that the civil society will reassert, reclaim its platform in order to keep the state on its toes and to make the states remain accountable. So that is the place, and that's the only guarantor of our, I would say, the platform of human rights at large. So I would request all of you to come up with your comments, questions, observations on this platform. So if you can, please go ahead. Are you with me?
Well, yes, we are students, please.
All right, please go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead. There is one question, I guess. Okay, that's not a question. There's a message that, yes, you can hear me. But can you speak some question? Do you have a question in your mind or a comment to make? Or if not, then I would have a question for all of you. Okay, so I can take random anybody's name in order to ask. Yulia Karpich, are you here with me?
Well, Yulia Karpich is actually one of organizers, so
okay.
she's not a student.
All right, thanks a lot for warning
me.
All right, so let me check who else is there. Anastasia, are you here with me? All right, you guys have just kept your presence technologically available, but you have gone. Daria Goodneva, are you here with me?
Yes.
All right. So my question is that while at the time of Corona was at its full swing and it was lethal even to imagine about Corona's impact, how did you see the way this triangle of this, the society, civil society, the market, and the state's engagement, and how do you really feel about the way the state has, acted or reacted or chose not to act or overact on this issue of, encroaching upon the platform of citizens' rights? Yeah. Did you get my question? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, so let me put the question in a far more lucid way. The question is that I guess we all have witnessed the horrible year that has just passed us. Now, let's take a very personal, observation on that issue. How did you identify, you as a citizen in your own country, witnessing this horrific tragedy that has unfolded before all of us. And where did you identify that the state and its engagement for the citizen on the issue of COVID-19, and again on the issue of how you as a citizen felt that you are restricted with your citizen's right? Yes? All right. I guess you guys have chosen not to speak anything. But am I audible clearly? The question is that if I can be heard properly, then I can understand that you're listening me. Otherwise, I would have this fear that my internet is not working.
Yes, we did understand you. Mm-hmm.
All right. Joseph, did you have my question clearly understood?
Oh, yes, actually,
Sure.
yes, it is.
Okay.
But
Would you like to
as
bring the feedback? Go ahead.
yes, I would like to. But as you've said, countries were not prepared, even developed countries were not prepared by this COVID-19 pandemic. And we are also not prepared, especially in my country. So when it struck our country last March 2020, am I right? That was the time, right? Yes, it's March 2020. Our government implemented a lot of restrictions, but a lot of policies. Or one of that is only one people in each family is allowed to go outside. So that's it. And we also have a lot of COVID-19 cases here. So I'm not really sure if the issue here is the government who implemented the policies, but but the issue can also be the culture of our country. I think the government part, they also already did their part. It's just that there is a problem with the culture, considering that we are enjoying this democracy. And that's also the reason why there is a lot of COVID-19 until now in my country. That's it.
Joseph, where are you from? Are you from Spain?
Yes.
Yes, your Paolo Andy could make me understand that you're from Spain. Lovely. It was great hearing you. I hope to see you sometime when our life comes back to a bit of normalcy.
Yeah,
and we go
so
back offline. Sure.
So I understand about the human rights, all of that. It's just that I think there's a problem with our culture. And if you just compared it to other Southeast Asia countries like in Vietnam or in Japan, they're all afraid. I'm not sure if they're afraid with their government, but yeah, perhaps they are. They're afraid with their government. That's why they're not really allowed. They're very disciplined people. But in my country, it's different. Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, Joseph. It's very, very useful to feedback from your side. And I would just add on from what you have said that yes, being an Asian myself, I would say that Asia is again not a monolithic country. The space, South Asia is very different from Southeast Asia, and East Asians are different from West Asian, which is Middle East. So my take would be, yes, that those countries which are having a bit of an authoritarian social culture, highly patriarchal culture, where either the religion or the political institutions are having over exceeding power, those states have faced least of the political resistance from the citizens, or I would say the youth were not on the streets, etc. But the countries like the Southern Europe, in particular Italy, the place where I'm hung and stuck here, or for that matter, Spain. These countries have, a very different, I would say, as to underscore and highlight your point, that these societies have a very, I would say, an outgoing, a rather outspoken, rather, freedom-loving social culture, and they found themselves that they are really gasping. But that's not really the truth with only South European countries. In Britain, you had mass protest against this, I would say, restrictions and lockdowns. And so was the case in certain pockets of United States, practically those people who were, rather skeptical about the whole idea of COVID-19, and they really thought it's a global conspiracy, etc. So they were really feeling that this is a ploy by the state to bring them to a perpetual, surveillance and monitoring and restrictions, etc. So that is a global phenomenon. But yes, culture has played a critical role. Yes, you're right. Anyone else here? Guys, please, come on.
I also wanted to mention general distrust towards the state in Russia, because people thought that the measures that are made are not enough to prevent COVID, and then they didn't believe in numbers, in data that government presented, and now they don't trust the vaccine. So everything that was made and that the state is making now isn't trusted by citizens, and that's the greatest problem, I believe.
A very great point that you have made, Alexandra, which is about the credibility crisis that the citizens have really been, this is a cascading thing, and I don't really know whether the states have gained any kind of respectability or confidence of the citizens by acting or behaving in a particular way. The citizens have felt that the state was trying to shortchange them. They were trying to kind of, behave in an arbitrary manner, and the citizens really felt that the state has not really cared for them the way they should have. So you're absolutely right on that. And the numbers, of course, most of them felt that the numbers are fuzzy, and it is underreported, underquoted, understatistized. So that is another painful, I would say, story of this COVID thing, in particular in the context of Russia. Yes, you're right. Yes, that's a very important point that you have made. I can see there are a few. So I mean, this, I guess, is the last section of today's engagement, and I'll be again very happy to say a few things which I guess in the very introductory lecture of today might have been spoken in detail by Professor Belyaeva. I would really be very happy to welcome you in our program of Masters in Public Policy, and you can be very, very free to raise any peripheral question on the subject of human rights or public policy, and we can really contextualize it in our today's with my today's discussion. So if you have any peripheral question, you are more than welcome for that too.
Okay, thank you, Professor, and thank you, everyone. It's the last class.
Thanks a lot for hosting and facilitating it. I'm very happy for this opportunity to speak to all the aspiring students of the Faculty of Social Sciences, and I wish you all a very great luck in your academic endeavor, and hope to see most of you in Higher School of Economics next academic year. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all. So we wait you tomorrow at 11 a.m. We'll be working on your projects. We'll split you in the groups in the session rooms, and you can consult with people on your projects, and then at 5 p.m. you will be presenting them. Yeah, so good luck, everyone. See you tomorrow.